Training is an important part of raising any Pokemon. That's why a major portion of the care section in these guides is usually taken up with how to train your Pokemon. Training sets the standards for how your Pokemon is going to act in public, how it's going to behave around its own enclosure, and, most importantly, how it's going to interact with you and other people. It's important for every Pokemon species out there, but for the fighting type, it's even more so. Their bodies are almost made to be muscular, made to be used and have their limits pushed. Without training, fighting-type Pokemon experience many more deleterious effects as opposed to if you and I just don't work out at all. And I don't think there's a better example of how important training can be on a fighting-type Pokemon than the subjects of this guide. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the martial artist Pokemon Tyrogue and its split evolutions of Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, and Hitmontop. Tyrogue is a small 2 foot 4 inch humanoid Pokemon, or 0.7 meters tall, that weighs an average of 46 pounds or 21 kilograms. They have a thin frame with predominantly purple skin and hips, thighs, and feet that are a brownish color. Its head is very round, with 3 protrusions that come out of its head like a mohawk. There are 3 fingers on each of its hands, and interestingly, it has white banding on certain parts of its body that seem to look a lot like bandages or wraps that people will use in bare-knuckle fights. In all, it very much looks like a Pokemon that is ready for a fight. Tyrogue also has a very unique method of evolution. Depending on how you train it, it can evolve into one of any 3 evolutions. We'll talk more about the evolution method and the training needed for each evolution later on in the care section. For now, let's talk about the evolutions themselves. Hitmonlee is another humanoid Pokemon with 2 legs and 2 arms. But instead of a head and a neck, they instead have an ovoid brown body with 2 dark eyes situated towards the top. Its legs and even parts of its arms look almost like coiled springs, which makes sense when you learn that their legs can actually stretch and extend far beyond what they look like they should. At the end of these legs are 2 large pad-like feet with 3 spiky toes on each. Hitmonlee also gets a lot bigger, now being 5 feet tall, 1.5 meters, and weighing just under 110 pounds, or 50 kilograms. As opposed to that, you could also have evolve into Hitmonchan, who uses their fists more than their legs. Hitmonchan looks very humanoid as well, with all the typical body features a human would have. However, the crown of their head is topped by 5 different protrusions. As well, they look almost like a boxer that's wearing a set of Unova football pads, though all the patterns of clothing or armor is simply skin pigmentation. At the end of Hitmonchan's arms are 2 large masses of muscle, which it uses similar to boxing gloves. Hitmonchan stands slightly shorter than Hitmonlee at 4 foot 7 inches, 1.4 meters, but is actually slightly heavier than its counterpart at just over 110 pounds, or 50.2 kilograms. The last and newest, by human standards, is Hitmontop. Again, this is another humanoid Pokemon, with a round center blue body, 2 arms, and 2 legs. Though, interestingly, this is the only one of the evolution lines that has a tail, which ends in a round blue ball with a spike on it. Its arms and legs are very thin, ending in brown spheres for hands, and its feet are large and blue, with 2 spikes facing towards the front and 1 spike facing backwards. Its head is, to me, the most interesting part of this Pokemon. The main face of the Pokemon is round, much like the rest of its body, but it has strange hair-like protrusions coming off the side of its head to either side. As well, its head is topped by a spike which it uses to balance on and spin, which is how it fights and how it got its name. Hitmontop is also the lightest of the 3 evolutions, coming in at 105.8 pounds, or 48 kilograms. Funny enough, when standing on its feet, it's actually the exact same height as Hitmonchan. In all, with the different evolutions and the different evolution methods, this line is very unique. Really, I had initially thought of breaking this into 3 separate guides, one for each evolution, because they just feel so different. But after looking into it and actually seeing just how similar they actually are, It just made more sense to fit them all together in one guide. Though, this might end up being longer than the usual guide though. Either way, if these exceptional fighting types sound at all interesting to you, then please listen in and see if these Pokemon might just be the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. Like I said in the very beginning of the guide, training is going to be the most important part of this Pokemon's routine. If these Pokemon don't get a consistent training schedule where they're able to work their bodies every day, then it can affect them in several ways. It's well known that Tyrogue will become anxious and stressed if it misses a day of exercise, and all of these Pokemon can go through serious physical debilitation if they go long enough without it. This means you'll have to do one of two things to accommodate this need. You'll either have to go to a place where your Pokemon can work out, like a gym, or you'll have to set up a space at your home for them to do so. For the rest of this section, I'm going to talk about it as if you're going to have the space set up at your home, as that's going to be more involved. If you plan on taking your Pokemon somewhere else to work out, then you can really ignore some parts of this guide. Let's start with their housing. Due to a quirk in their breeding, which I'll talk about later on in the availability section, these Pokemon have been heavily domesticated by humanity. The main effect of this that we're going to focus on for right now is the fact that these Pokemon are very easy to keep in your home. Admittedly, their humanoid proportions do make this a bit odd, but realistically, the best and easiest method of housing these Pokemon is giving them a bed and a room. They are very intelligent, and if you work with them a little bit to lay down the rules of the house and what they can and cannot do inside, then you should have no problems with them at all. So long as they're getting their exercise, that is. If not, then they can be nightmares on the inside of your house. But then again, in that situation, you're also mistreating your Pokemon, and probably shouldn't have it in the first place. As for the workout area, you're going to want a lot of different workout equipment for these guys. Unfortunately, these Pokemon are more in the martial artist side of the fighting type, unlike the bodybuilder type of physique that the Machop line has, meaning that you can't just use simple rocks and heavy things to help them get their workouts done. No, these Pokemon have more specific needs than that, and because of that need, you'll need actual workout equipment. I'm talking weights, punching bags, even a ring where they can practice their combat abilities. Also, don't forget water. They're going to need a lot of water to help them recover from all this exercise. These are all basic things that any of the evolutions can make use of, including Tyrogue. But of course, each of them is going to need specific things thanks to their differing biology. Hitmonlee will probably need more space between the equipment thanks to the use of their legs in their fighting and the stretchiness that those legs have. Hitmonchan is going to need the space to be a bit cooler, as while they hit fast and they hit hard, they can tire themselves out very quickly, and they heat up very fast. Having that cool air will allow them to recover faster. And Hitmontop is actually going to need a smooth, flat space that they can use to practice their spinning techniques. As for Tyrogue, well, that's really going to depend on which evolution you're trying to help it evolve into. But we'll talk more about that in the care section. I know I keep saying that. And I could go on and on and on about different specifics that you could do for each of these Pokemon, but really, all you have to keep in mind is that this is a space for training, for your Pokemon to push their body's limits and expend a lot of energy. As long as you have that, then you should be good. As for any Pokemon that could be housed with your Tyrogue evolution, keep in mind that these Pokemon can be very competitive with each other and with other Pokemon around them. Anything that is more well known for its sedentary lifestyle, like the Slowpoke line or the Munchlax line, would be bad ideas. As well, you want to avoid types that are weak or strong against fighting types, even if they're willing to compete with your Tyrogue evolution. Messing with type advantages and disadvantages when dealing with a competitive atmosphere like this could very easily lead to some issues. Really, what you're looking for are rare Pokemon that'll be able to keep up with your Tyrogue evolution, and they're tough enough to not take too bad of a hurting while dishing out not too bad of a hurting as well. Realistically, I'd keep these guys on their own, as throwing another species of Pokemon into this kind of atmosphere is a gamble, and it's best not to take that in my opinion. The one thing that I will say is that they do very well when paired together. They both have that same fighting spirit and that same drive for training, so they'll really play well off of each other in that case. I should especially mention here that Tyrogue will attempt to fight and challenge anything that gets housed with it, even if it's something that it has no hope of beating. It's a common joke for a reason that these Pokemon would fight Arceus itself if they get a chance. So just be aware of that. Availability. Here's where I have some bad news. These Pokemon aren't that common in the wild, and that's for a reason. The entire species, no matter what evolution you're looking at, is male. Why this is, I'm not sure. There isn't any data or explanations for it online that I can find. Perhaps it used to have a female counterpart like the Volbeat and Illumise line, but if that's the case, then the female counterpart went extinct a long time ago. There's a chance that it maybe is the Jinx line, but if that's the case, why would they evolve to live in two very different biomes? I don't know. But this lack of a female counterpart almost led to the extinction of the species, which is why there are so few of them left in the wild. Thankfully, after the knowledge of breeding became understood, a major conservation effort was put into place and they started breeding the Tyrogue evolutions with Ditto to try and get the numbers up again. But realistically, this is all a stalling pattern. Without a female of the species, they can't rebuild their numbers without human assistance, and if our efforts were to ever fail or falter, then the line could easily disappear from history. This is why I mentioned earlier that they are so domesticated towards humanity. After generations and generations of the Pokemon being only raised in captivity, the entire line has adapted to live alongside us. And this is also why they are so rare in the wild. Any Tyrogue or Tyrogue evolution that you find is most likely from a breeding program that either got lost in the wilderness or escaped into the wilderness. It's a sad existence, and one that I really hope that we can find a solution to the issue soon. As things stand right now, there are major fears in the scientific community that their genetics will begin to stagnate with such a small gene pool available. Which does bring me to the breeding scene. There are really two different breeding circuits for these Pokemon. The first is the conservation efforts that I mentioned before. These are often run by environmental agencies or things of that nature. If you want to get a Pokemon from these guys, it's usually a lot of work. They're going to investigate you, make sure you have the necessary lifestyle and are actually able to care for the Pokemon. They'll also probably draw up a contract where they can still call on you if they need the Pokemon for breeding later on down the line. Like I said, it's a lot more work, but they are more numerous than the private breeders. Thanks to their niche care style and the fact that you pretty much have to live and breathe martial arts to be able to care for these Pokemon effectively, the pool of people that actively want to get one of these Pokemon isn't that big. Combine that with the fact that you can only breed these Pokemon through the use of Ditto, which a lot of professional breeders look down on unless you're in desperate straits, and not many people are going to invest in raising these Pokemon. If you don't want to go through the conservation breeders and aren't up for tracking down a wild one, then finding a breeder for these guys won't be an easy journey. Catchability. If you do manage to find one of these guys in the wild, then actually catching them will be a challenge in and of itself. Thanks to their abilities, they are very difficult to actually hit with a Pokeball. When you try, they'll commonly do the old bob and weave and just dodge it. Meaning that your best bet is to battle it and tire it out. Your best bet to do this is to use a flying or psychic type Pokemon. I would recommend a flying type for Hitmonlee and Hitmontop, as they don't really have any moves that a flying type Pokemon would really need to worry about, but for Hitmonchan, the elemental punches that it can learn are very dangerous to flying type Pokemon, so a psychic type would probably be best for that one. And you want to have a decently strong Pokemon as well, since these Pokemon are no slouches in the battle department. As for the type of Pokeball you could use, I would say that a Pokeball or Great Ball would be fine if you find a Tyrogue, and definitely an Ultra Ball for any of the evolutions. Care. Okay, I've been harping on about the training through this entire guide, so let's actually get into it, starting with you. If you end up getting a Tyrogue, which you most likely are, as that's the most common Pokemon for the conservatories and breeders to sell, then you have to be deeply involved in its training. You see, the older evolution styles are more set in their martial arts and fighting styles, so they don't really need someone to come in and show them how to train themselves. And this is because the training affects the evolution. How a Tyrogue gets trained while it's young will influence whether they evolve into a Hitmonchan, a Hitmonlee, or a Hitmontop. This is why the evolutions don't need instruction. They're used to the routines of training, while Tyrogue is not. Unlike the Machamp line, Tyrogue doesn't have an instinctive understanding of how to train itself, but needs that training to be healthy. And if they don't get some instruction in it before they dive into it, they could easily end up doing something wrong and hurting themselves. Think of it like a newbie at the gym trying to deadlift without the correct form and getting hurt. And this is where you come in. You have to train your Tyrogue. You are going to have to teach it how to work out, and more importantly, you are going to have to teach it how to fight, meaning you have to know how to fight. This is why these Pokemon are so limited in their popularity. To effectively raise and house a Tyrogue, you need to be a martial artist yourself, and a good enough one that you can pass on your skills and teach them to someone else, even if that someone else is a Pokemon. The first step to getting and caring for these Pokemon is to have an active lifestyle and learn a martial art. Without those two things, then you don't have the correct basis to teach these Pokemon. And even then, how you teach them and what fighting style you teach them is going to affect them deeply. Like I said, the martial art affects the evolution, meaning you have to decide what method you're going to use to train them. If you teach them to prioritize attack more over defense, then they will eventually evolve into a Hitmonlee, where if you do the opposite, they will evolve into a Hitmonchan. And if you're very careful about it and train them in equal measures of defense and attack, only then can you have them evolve into Hitmontop. Fair warning, the last one is very tricky and very easy to mess up, which is why the evolution wasn't discovered until after the understanding of breeding, when we could really study the Tyrogue evolution method in captivity. Now, I am nowhere near a martial artist. I don't even like to participate in Pokemon battles, so I can't get into the specifics of how to actually train your Pokemon without sounding like an idiot. But if you listen to me and actually learn how to do martial arts yourself from somebody who's qualified, then you should be able to adapt and build a training schedule for your Pokemon. I will add on that once your Tyrogue evolves and the training has become old habits, then a lot of people online like to think of their Pokemon as great sparring partners. So, if you can get through the Tyrogue teaching stages, then you'll end up with a good training partner out of it for yourself. With food, it's not going to be that much different than what a human would eat when undergoing tough training. This means that you want plenty of protein for those developing muscles, veggies and fruits for different sources of vitamins and minerals, and then carbohydrates for energy. What you want are good, lean sources of protein, like poultry, or carb-heavy sources like mixed nuts. Try to lean more towards the meat side of that, as that'll also provide them with a healthy amount of fats in their diet as well. The only weird part about the meat is that, despite how humanoid these Pokemon look, they're still Pokemon. You're gonna have to feed them raw meat, which is a little weird, but almost every humanoid Pokemon has that weird feeling attached to it, so yeah. As for the fruits and veggies, you could really use any that you want, but some of the more popular ones that I've seen online are things like nuts, rice, carrots, bananas, or oats. Your best bet is to have a mixture of all of these and try to vary them up over time. As for amounts and how much you should feed them, well, that's a matter of debate. A lot of the talk about food online for active people and Pokemon like this don't give hard numbers. It's more of a feeling thing. That means that you'll need to do at least a bit of experimentation to find the correct amount for your individual Pokemon. I will say though that the composition of the meals is important as well. For these meals, you want them to be majority protein, about 65% protein to 35% fruits and veggies. The only time that you'll alter this formula is for the meal after they're done working out for the day. At that point, you should alter this to a more even 50-50. This will provide a good amount of muscle repair and energy stores while they're sleeping. As for how often you should feed them, they'll need 3 major meals just like humans do, but in between meals they should also have smaller snacks, just handfuls of protein-rich foods that they can use for energy and for muscle building. Cost. Depending on if you make the gym part of the enclosure at your home, or if you decide to go somewhere else, this part could end up costing you a lot or a little. If you decide to get all the equipment you'll need, this could easily end up putting you in the very high category. Gym equipment ain't cheap. The gym membership will only put you in the low category per membership, but it's a matter of if you even have one near you. It might be the case where you don't have a choice but to buy all of the equipment yourself. Aside from all that, the bed and room decorations shouldn't even be a drop in the bucket compared to everything else. Food-wise, you're essentially feeding another human at this point, so you're probably looking at the high category per month, if not more. Their strict dietary requirements and the fact that they need to eat so often mean your grocery bill is probably going to double. The Pokemon might just be the cheapest part of the whole thing. Because of the strict requirements to raise these Pokemon, it doesn't sell very well, which really brings the price down as far as it'll go. Sure, the breeders are going to charge more because of all the care and training they'll need to give the Pokemon, but I don't see it going much above the moderate price, possibly the high price range for an evolved Pokemon, since they've had to put in the time and energy to actually train the Pokemon at that point. Funny enough, despite all the checks and inspections that you'll have to go through with them, a conservation breeder will actually cost you less, but you'll have a lot more oversight in how you raise and care for the Pokemon, and they will still hold partial ownership of the Pokemon in case they want it for breeding purposes. If that's something that you're willing to deal with, then the price could easily go down to the low category for Tyrogue, or the upper end of the moderate category for one of the evolved forms. Conclusion. I don't see how these Pokemon could possibly be for anyone who isn't a martial artist themselves. Just to raise these Pokemon, you need to pretty much live in the gym. Literally, if you decide to build the at-home enclosure. Sure, the older evolutions can be very self-sufficient, but if you get a Tyrogue and want to raise it from that, you have to know how to fight, train, and compete with your Pokemon. There's no two ways about it. And despite how massive that roadblock is to a lot of people, it's really the only roadblock there is. Their enclosure is simple, their diet is pretty much just a human diet, and once you're trained and a martial artist yourself, they are fantastic to interact with. You will never find a more dedicated training partner than one of these Pokemon. They are fantastically easy to care for, aside from needing to be a martial artist yourself. And if you have the skill set to overcome that issue, then I could easily see these Pokemon becoming the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we cover the round, pink Pokemon Lickitung and its evolution Licky Licky. Have a wonderful night, everyone.